Thousands of mourners remembering the icon who paved the way for American women. Late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg lying in repose today at the nation's highest court. In a private ceremony, her friends, family, and colleagues honored RBG's life and legacy. A trailblazer to the very end, she will be the first woman and first Jewish person to lie in state at the Capitol this week. Here are some highlights from today's service.
Today, we stand in mourning of an American hero, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The justice was a mother, a grandmother, and as we all know, had one of the most extraordinary life partners in her beloved Marty. To insist that the Constitution deliver on its promise that we, the people, would include all the people. She carried out that work in every chapter of her life. As an advocate arguing 6 times before this court for equal treatment for women and men, as a judge on the D.C. circuit, and as a justice on this court, and as a path-marking role model to women and girls of all ages, who now know that no office is out of reach for their dreams, whether that is to serve in the highest court of our land or closer to home for me as the rabbi of their community.
She was here to fight for everybody's rights and to show us that anybody could be who they want and what job they want to have.
She fought to not just give women equal rights, but she also fought for men to have equal rights. No matter what your gender or race or marital preference was, everybody was afforded the same rights in this country as it should be in America.
For many years, of course, Ruth battled serious illness. She met each of those challenges with a combination of candid assessment and fierce determination. And she emerged victorious, time and again, against all odds. But finally, the odds won out, and now Ruth has left us. I mentioned at the outset that Ruth's passing weighed most heavily on her family, and that is true. But the court was her family, too. This building was her home, too. Of course, she will live on in what she did to improve the law and the lives of all of us. And yet, still, Ruth is gone, and we grieve.
Justice Ginsburg, Midor Lador, from generation to generation, we promise to carry forward your legacy. May you rest under the wings of the Shekhinah, knowing that you have tirelessly served us and this great country, the United States of America.
Justice Ginsburg served on the Supreme Court for almost 30 years. Today, as she entered the court one last time, more than 100 of her former clerks stood watch outside. Inside the court's Great Hall, Chief Justice John Roberts gave a moving tribute.
Later, she became a star on the bench, where she sat for 27 years. Her 483 majority, concurring, and dissenting opinions will steer the court for decades. They are written with the unaffected grace of precision. Her voice in court and in our conference room was soft, but when she spoke, people listened.
NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams joins me now. Pete, you have covered Justice Ginsburg since she was appointed to the Supreme Court in '93. Would you talk to us more about her legacy on the bench?
Well, on the bench, her legacy kind of picked up where she left off with what she had done as an advocate for the Supreme Court, persuading the justices that it was a violation of the Constitution to treat men and women differently under the law. And that, of course, was an important thing for her as a Supreme Court justice to continue that and remind her male colleagues. She, of course, was the second woman on the Supreme Court. And for a time, she and Sandra Day O'Connor were just the two, to remind her male colleagues of the kind of situation and discrimination that women felt. But she was a person who believed in separation of church and state, She believed in limiting application of the death penalty. A person who ruled often in favor of civil rights in general. She was, of course, toward the end of her career, as the court became more conservative, she became the great dissenter. And, you know, you could tell when she was going to read a dissent from the bench, because that collar that you see in this picture here, that's technically called a gibbet. And she had a different one if she was going to dissent. And so if she wore her dissent collar when she came into the court, you thought to yourself, look out, because she's going to read a dissent. And perhaps one of her most famous ones was in the case of a woman who worked for Goodyear, who found out after she had been there for many years that her male colleagues who did exactly the same work were paid more. So she sued, and the Supreme Court, with Justice Ginsburg in a blistering dissent, said, well, tough, under the law, you have to sue when the pay disparity first arises. Well, of course, she didn't know that this woman, whose name is Lily Ledbetter, didn't know about it. And Justice Ginsburg wrote a very strong dissent and basically said, OK, Congress, you fix this. And Congress did. They passed what became known as the Lily Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. And that's just, you know, one example. She also dissented very strongly when the Supreme Court, in essence, took the guts out of the Voting Rights Act a couple of years ago. Just because blacks were getting more opportunities, because we had an African-American president. She said this is saying we don't need the Voting Rights Act before is like saying I don't need an umbrella anymore because the sun's out today.
Pete, Chief Justice Roberts also called Ginsburg's life a version of the American dream. Here he is.
Justice Ginsburg's life was one of the many versions of the American dream. Her father was an immigrant from Odessa. Her mother was born 4 months after her family arrived from Poland. Her mother later worked as a bookkeeper in Brooklyn. Ruth used to ask, what is the difference between a bookkeeper in Brooklyn and a Supreme Court justice? Her answer, 1 generation.
How did Justice Ginsburg's court decisions, her work as a lawyer, how did they shape the lives of other Americans? Because I think there are so many people who are thinking she helped other people achieve the American dream.
Well, without question. And the Chief Justice basically tipped his hat to that today by saying that she made the nation better and the law, the reach of the law better, noting the fact that there are more women in law schools, as among the student body in law schools now than there are men. Such a huge change from when Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor went to law school and were really outliers. You know, the other thing, of course, is Justice Ginsburg, as her fighting spirit. I mean, you know, she dealt with cancer, 4 different forms of cancer. And each time she would schedule the chemotherapy or the radiation therapy so that she would not miss oral argument in the court. And despite her repeated trips to the hospital and for all these kinds of therapy, she missed very few days of oral argument. I don't think she ever missed a case that she should have participated in but didn't. It was such a determination, such a strong work ethic. And, of course, knowing that she had these health problems, we would always keep a very close eye on her in the courtroom. You know, did Justice Ginsburg, was she walking slowly today? Was she quieter today? And there was one famous episode where when the oral argument session is over, all the justices stand up and file out through those curtains behind the bench. And she was slumped down and seemed to take a long time to get up. And everyone was terribly worried until we finally found out that what happened is during oral argument, she had kicked off her shoes and was trying to put one of them back on.
Pete, the anecdotes about her, the stories that you've been sharing, just so incredible. One last question for you. I know that Bill and Hillary Clinton went to the Supreme Court today to say their goodbyes. Of course, President Clinton appointed Ginsburg to the court. What do we know about their relationship? What was that like?
Well, remember that, of course, it was Jimmy Carter that first put Justice Ginsburg on the federal appeals court just down the street here in Washington, the D.C. Court of Appeals, and it was President Clinton who elevated her to the Supreme Court. What we have been learning in the past few days is that originally President Clinton was thinking about nominating Stephen Breyer to the Supreme Court, which, of course, he eventually did in the next opening, and that it was Hillary Clinton who suggested to the president, you know, you really ought to interview this Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And the president interviewed her and was very impressed by her. And I think she was, you know, obviously any justice is grateful to the president who puts them on the court. But I think they did remain, she remained very grateful because of that.
Pete, so many wonderful stories and such an incredible legacy. Thank you for being with us to talk about the notorious RBG.
You bet.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a pioneer for gender equality well before she became a Supreme Court justice. Here she is at her confirmation hearing in 1993.
In my lifetime, I expect to see 3, 4, perhaps even more women on the High Court bench, women not shaped from the same mold, but of different complexions.
MSNBC host and NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell joins me now. Andrea, I just want to start by thanking you. I know it has been a long and emotional day. I asked our team if you could be here with us today because of the special and personal relationship you had with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I thought maybe you would just leave a story for us. I can't thank you enough for working such a long day today and taking the time to be with us and to talk about her. I'm so grateful.
No, it's a privilege. And I think that talking about her and about her legacy is so important to me right now. Frankly, more important than talking about the fierce political battle surrounding her succession, the succession.
I'd love to talk to you about her role as a woman on the Supreme Court. She was just the second woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, the first Jewish woman. If there is one thing people will likely remember her for, it is her lifelong fight for gender equality. Could you talk to us more about her advocacy for women's rights, especially as a younger lawyer? I know she fought so fiercely for women to be able to be at the table alongside men.
Absolutely. And it was partly she couldn't get a law firm job when she got out of Columbia Law. She transferred there from Harvard Law to follow her husband, Martin Ginsburg, who as a Jewish man couldn't get a job in a law firm in Boston, so went to New York. So she left before finishing Harvard. He was been ahead of her at Harvard. And so she goes to Columbia, tops in her class, can't get a job there, barely got a clerkship, and couldn't get a clerkship at the Supreme Court from Justice Frankfurter because she was a woman. And as a result, she ends up going to Rutgers and joining a project on women's equity, and we're framing it, and then the ACLU Women's Rights Project. So it was that really helped her mobilize her intellectual energy, her passion for this. Marty Ginsburg, her devoted and wonderful husband, helped her actually in some of the early cases. Then she argued 6 cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court between 1973 and 1978, winning 5 of the 6. It's an extraordinary record. And they were on gender equality, but they were so strategically chosen. She figured out how to find cases that had male plaintiffs, a male nurse, a widower who was trying to get Social Security benefits for his children. So she would argue the case that men were as disadvantaged by sexism in the law and the tax codes as women were, and that equal rights under the law was really what this needed to be for both men and women. And she was winning these cases for men. And as many have written, she was finding a way to get into the heads of the men on the all-male Supreme Court at that point and win them little by little over to her position. It was extraordinary.
I know you knew her very well. I learned today, I didn't know this before today, that she officiated your wedding. Would you mind sharing some of your fond memories of her, maybe some of the things that those of us who just knew her as a Supreme Court justice might not have known about her?
Well, she had a wonderful sense of humor. She was a wonderful mentor. When I saw those clerks, more than 100 of her former clerks standing silently, socially distanced because of the pandemic on the steps of the court today, every one of them has a story to share about how she helped them along, and her work ethic, the dedication to her work. The love affair with her husband was profound. It was so moving to see the two of them together. her kids had joked that their father had to learn to cook because otherwise they would have starved because she was so bad at it. And he not only learned to cook, he became a gourmet cook. He would fashion those wonderful New Year's dinners with the Scalias. I interviewed Chris Scalia today, one of their sons, and he had such wonderful memories of the families together, her sense of humor, his father, of course, his sense of humor, and the fact that she worked so well across ideological lines. The remembrances from the other justices that were written tributes on Saturday were so personal, and from Clarence Thomas, and each talking about them and their spouses for the male members. I mean, it was really amazing that those justices all loved her so much and in such personal ways. I thought that Justice Roberts was very personal and endearingly so. He talked about her passion for opera. Then he said, sports, not so much, or sports non-existent, or some quote
Right.
from that great tribute. But the music, the love of that, her close friendship with Steve Breyer, who Pete correctly says was destined for that first opening on the Clinton White House. And then she just wowed Bill Clinton in their job interview that Hillary Clinton had talked the president into doing, or suggested doing, I should say. And then I was in the Rose Garden that glorious day. It was a beautiful, bright, shiny, sunshiny June day when she was the second woman to be nominated, and of course overwhelmingly confirmed. And Bill Clinton was so excited about it. They shared so much together, their love of constitutional law, which he had taught back in Arkansas. She was just the kindest, strongest, most disciplined person that any of us have ever known. And the brilliance of her mind was overwhelming. And her modesty, I should say.
Andrea, I don't want to get into the politics today because, as you said, this is really a day to remember her, to talk about her legacy. But I would like to talk about the context of what's going on in the Supreme Court. We know that Justice Ginsburg's dying wish was that she not be replaced on the court until after the election. We also know that President Trump is planning to announce his nominee to replace her this weekend. Could we just talk for a moment about how dramatically the Supreme Court could potentially change here? Because I think many Americans are just waking up to the fact that we could be looking in just a month or so at a Supreme Court that's very different in its makeup.
Absolutely. And the fact that it won't be an 8-8 tie. In the past, when for more than 400 days, it was, only 8 judges, I should say a 4-4 tie of 8 justices, when the Republican Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, refused to let Merrick Garland even get a hearing or even have visits with the senators on the Judiciary Committee or any of the senators. It was just remarkable that happened. And now, of course, the reversal, which many have said is hypocritical because there's no footnote in any constitutional law or any of the Senate procedures that says, well, you can do this when both parties control the Senate and the White House. That has never before been suggested. So never before in history, not when Abraham Lincoln had an opening, Justice Taney, and decided not to nominate anyone until after the election in 1864 because he didn't want to presume that he would be reelected. And then there was the nomination afterwards. There's never been a nomination or a hearing and potentially a vote this close to an election. And the fact that this is in defiance of her fervent, as she described it, dying wish, which she dictated to her granddaughter, Clara Spira, at her deathbed, within days of dying, is just remarkable. And that decision was made and announced by the majority leader on Friday night, within 2 hours of her passing, without any respect for time for the family, for condolences, or for this kind of tribute, say nothing of a burial. So this is all pretty remarkable. I think that the changes are going to be profound. As is likely, a justice will be nominated. And if Mitch McConnell wants to take it up before, as the president does want, before the election, that will likely happen. There are very few tools that the minority Democrats have to stop it. And if that were to happen, and we know the 2 leading candidates are both very strong conservatives, social conservatives, it is very likely that the arguments on November 10th, right after the election for Obamacare, will be heard by a Supreme Court, which is very much likely to overturn either key parts or such important parts that foundational to the financing of Obamacare, that it ends Obamacare coverage for pre-existing conditions, which now, of course, includes COVID. Just the fact that so many millions of Americans will be affected by this, some 30 million Americans immediately. Then, of course, you've got the other arguments pending that will eke away at the women's rights to choose, other reproductive freedom. So many other things that are pending. You've got potentially post-election Supreme Court challenges to decide the presidential election. That is not beyond the realm of
right,
hypotheticals right now. So the affirmative action down the road, everything that she fought for, really, in terms of human rights, gender rights, voting rights, the Shelby case, and further challenges to the census, immigration, DACA, you name it. There is no issue, environmental questions, rollbacks of air pollution regulations. There's basically no aspect of American life, legal, social, educational, that won't be affected by this court, this new court, for decades to come.
Andrea, I know I said it at the beginning, but I just can't thank you enough for the generosity of your time and for just sharing so many of those personal moments with us. We are so grateful, and it was such a pleasure to remember her today along with you.
Well, the pleasure's mine. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.